Good morning. Today is the 11th day of second Adar. This is what's called Ta'anit Esther, the fast of Esther, which is usually the day before Purim, but because Purim is on Sunday, we don't fast on Shabbat, so we move it to the Thursday before. And it is also the 21st of March. We're in the fifth reading of Parashat Vayikra. And here we come to one of the central topics of the Torah, which is how do you atone for sin? So the verses read, we're looking at Leviticus 4:1. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites, saying, if a person unintentionally transgresses any of the passive commandments of God, and he either completed one of these acts or committed part of one of them." So now, this is the general introduction. If a person in general, ad nefesh kitachta, and then we have a number of different headings, subheadings now. The first one is if an anointed priest who sins, thus bringing guilt on the people. So an anointed priest, he did something wrong in the tabernacle, in the temple, and he causes other people to have sinned, also because of his actions. He requires a bull for a sin offering. Now, the second heading is, or if the whole Israelite community sins unintentionally. And this refers to the Sanhedrin, the highest court, that erred in a ruling. And the majority of the congregation acted according to their incorrect ruling, and then they later figured out that they made a mistake. Then it is the Sanhedrin, the judges, that must bring a bull for a sin offering. This bull is known as the bull of an unwitting communal sin. Then we have the third heading, which is when a nasi is a king, sins unintentionally. And this, in the sages, this is an amazing thing. They consider this to be the most one of the most important verses in the entire Torah. Why? Because it's saying that you have a king who has a great deal of power, and he's coming and he's admitting that he did something wrong. And the sages say this famous statement in the Talmud, Asher nasi yachta, if a king should commit a sin and obviously come to admit it and bring a sin offering, Ashrei ador shenasi shelo mevi chatat. Blessed is the generation, or how gifted is the generation that has a king who admits to his sin and comes to bring a sin offering. And the fourth is if any member of the community sins unintentionally. And here we're going back to what the first statement said. It's referring to any individual who did something unwittingly. Again, these are all unwitting, meaning he didn't mean to do it. There was some mistake that he made, or he didn't realize what the situation was, and so on and so forth. So he must bring a female goat or a lamb. One of the ways to look at this is from the Baal Shem Tov. We know that even though this is talking about four different people, four different categories of people, and you can't really belong to all four, certainly not at the same time. You can't be the entire Sanhedrin, that's for sure. You can't be an anointed priest if you're a king. You can't be a king if you're an anointed priest. And obviously you're none of these if you're just a member of the community. But the way that the Baal Shem Tov teaches the Torah is that everything that it talks about one specific individual is also talking about all individuals. And the way to look at this is that when you transport the Torah's verses from their literal plain meaning and you transport it into the psychology of the human being in general, then you'll find that we all have within us an anointed priest, we have a Sanhedrin inside of us, we have a king inside of us, and we also have a simple individual inside all of us. So what you can end up doing is you can see that these four categories permeate each person, and they're actually talking about every individual. So how would we explain it in this case? We would say that this is talking about a psychological process that accompanies every unintentional sin. And this psychological process, meaning that a person doesn't just sin by mistake. Even mistakes have some kind of background in the psyche where they come from. So this psychological process begins from the general point that dwells in me. That's what we called the general statement, should a soul sin? Should an individual sin? And it continues with the high priest within me, and then it goes to the Sanhedrin within me, then the king within me, and finally down to the simple person inside of me. So now, since we have 5 stages, really 4, but we said the general statement in the beginning that someone should sin in general, like we said here, if a person unintentionally transgresses any of the passive commandments of God. So that's the general statement. So with that, we have 5 stages here. And whenever we have something that has 5 stages, then we usually correspond it to the parts of God's essential name, Havaya, that has 4 letters to it, which is why it's called the Tetragrammaton. And there's the tip of the Yud, which the Kabbalists recognize, they describe as a separate element. So altogether you have 5. The separate element, the tip of the Yud, corresponds to the crown. So that would be the general statement in the beginning, that's the crown. The priests in general are the teachers of the Torah. It's an important thing to know about priests. Most of the time they weren't in the temple. There were so many priests. Aaron had such a large family that most of the time they were at home. But they didn't have land, because that was one of the things that the Levites don't inherit land. So what did they do? What did they and the Levites do, the entire tribe of Levi? And particularly the priests, they were teachers. They taught Torah. That was their role. You could say that they were the first urban people because they couldn't till land. They were not allowed to. So their role is to teach the Torah with divine inspiration. And they probably got this divine inspiration in the week or 2 weeks that they had temple duty, that they had to go to the temple. Another role of the high priest, obviously, is to be in the temple, but there what they do is they do 2 things. They pray for all of Israel, and they bless them. So in the psyche, the beginning of sin is within the high priest within me, and what that means is I am not sufficiently connected to the whole. I do not pray for everyone. I do not bless them as I should. And this level corresponds to the letter Yud in God's name, Havaya, because Yud represents the sphere of wisdom. And it's not just wisdom in the sense of being a teacher, but it's an inner experience of self-nullification, and that is what leads both to proper instruction and to a sense of caring for the entire community. So all unwitting sin begins with a blemish here, with a problem at this level, that I don't have enough self-nullification, I don't have enough wisdom, and that starts the process going. The next level of error is within the Sanhedrin. In the psyche, the Sanhedrin is the judicial system determining for myself and others the difference between right and wrong. And where do we do that? We do that in the sphere of understanding. Understanding is to differentiate between one thing and another. So there's an element of understanding that's about differentiating between what is permitted and what is not permitted. After the blemish in self-nullification in the intellectual power of wisdom, there is to be found a lack of proper judgment on the left side. The left side is always associated with judgment. The intellectual power of understanding is blemished. So these 2 levels, the anointed priest and the entire congregation of Israel, referring to the Sanhedrin, as in the verse above, correspond to the letters Yud and Hey. And when you take these 2 phrases together, HaKohen HaMashiach is called here, the anointed priest, and Kol Adat Yisrael, the entire congregation of Israel, which again stands for the Sanhedrin, together they equal grace times Havaya. Meaning this is, in a certain sense, it's the ability to have symmetry with God. The next level is the king. Everyone has a leadership role in relation to others, and that is his sovereignty in life. The role of leadership is to determine what and who to bring close and what and who to keep away. And if one errs in this regard, it is a reason for sin. I know that this is not the way we usually think about leadership, but the Jewish king, his role is really to bring people closer to God. And it's to determine who needs to be brought close through embracing them, and who needs to be brought close by pushing them away. It may stand counter to reason for most people, but sometimes to bring someone close, you also have to push them away. And you could say, absence makes the heart grow fond, or something like that, but it's not just that. It's a very simple thing that sometimes a person needs to be shown that he's doing something wrong, and then, only then, after he fixes it, can he come back. So if you make an error at this regard, but this also has to do with our conduct every day. To be a king, what does it really mean to be a king? To be a king means to master my environment. A person cannot control his life, and we're all supposed to be kings of our own lives. That's why God gave us free will. So to master our lives, we have to first of all show that we know how to push away what doesn't need to be near us, and to bring and embrace that which should. So for instance, if a person is not a master over their time, they're not a master over the various diversions that are around them in their office, in their home, then they're not a king. And that's a blemish in each person in his kingship. And finally, we have the lowest level. The last level is the individual himself, and one soul from among the people. Up to this point, there were 3 levels of responsibility towards others: to be a high priest, meaning to teach Torah, to be involved with everyone, to pray for everyone; then to be a judge, to judge correctly social situations, and so on; and 3, to be a king, practical leadership. So if there is sin, misguided actions, and errors at these levels, it ultimately manifests in my personal sin. So the 4th level here is receiving from all the mistakes that were done above. And that is the process by which a person comes to do something unwittingly. And again, the main teaching here is that mistakes don't just happen. They have some kind of background. They start somewhere. And even when I say, I did this by mistake, I didn't notice, I didn't think, I didn't this, I didn't that, I have to know that the psychology doesn't work that way. The psychology of my brain is such that I come to these mistakes because of a whole series, a whole chain of previous problems. And those previous problems might not be a sin, they might not be something entirely wrong, but they begin to accumulate. And finally, I come to the state in which I can almost say I'm not responsible for what I did. I lost my ability to think about what I was doing and how I was doing it, and so on and so forth. And this all is a result of a long process. It doesn't just happen. You can get something of an idea of this if you think about a Freudian slip, that a person doesn't make a mistake in what they say, at least Freud thought so, unless there's a lot that is covered up. And you only see the tip of the iceberg. That's the mistake, the misdemeanor that you see. But really, there's a whole 90% underneath, underwater, that led up to this. And so to fix these things, especially today when we don't have sacrifices, so you have to look at these 3 categories before. Again, teaching and being with self-nullification, and feeling responsibility towards others, praying for them, and so on, blessing them. And then the 2nd level, which we said, is to judge reality in the right way. And the 3rd level that we mentioned is to be a king, to be a sovereign over our own lives, to be able to control how we live, to be able to make conscious decisions about what we should keep near us and what we should push away. And then finally, if all these things are rectified, there's a good chance that you won't make any sins. Again, these are unwitting. They're not things that a person did on purpose. The famous story that I'll end with, that there's a thing that says that if you make a mistake in your prayers on Shabbat, when the prayers are different, then that's a sign that you're going to have problems in the coming week. And this was once the Komarna Rebbe, one of the great Rebbes of the 3rd generation of Chassidus. He writes about this in his journal. He's one of the few Rebbes to write a journal. And he says, of course you should be wary and afraid about what's going to happen in the next week, because if you make a mistake, it means you're not paying attention. And if you're not paying attention, when the week starts, you're not going to be paying attention about things that are much more costly than just making a mistake in what you prayed and the wording that you used. It's going to be something much more serious. So you have to be very careful. And in a certain sense, you prepare the next week, not physically, not in practice, but emotionally and spiritually. You prepare the week with the prayers that you pray during the Shabbat. So with this, we'll end. Thanks for joining. Hope to see you tomorrow. And tomorrow will be at the regular time, meaning I believe it's like now 9:15 a.m. Eastern, 6:15 a.m. Pacific. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.